Do you realize we are living in a world where everyone is shouting just to prove they exist? Every morning, millions of fingers tap on screens, opening pages filled with victories, smiles, and grand declarations of a bright future. People talk about their plans, posting every step, every photo, to illustrate their journey toward the dream. Yet something feels wrong in that picture, as if the whole world is trying to shout loud enough to drown out a growing fear inside, the fear of being forgotten. We are taught that to succeed, we must be seen. We must speak up. We must express ourselves. But in all that noise, we begin to forget an ancient truth, that true power never needs to be shown. It only needs to be felt. I remember once standing in a party full of young and ambitious people in New York. Everyone talking, everyone sharing about new projects, new connections, new achievements they were about to reach. They were like bright spotlights, competing to shine, competing to prove they were the most remarkable. In the corner of the room stood a middle-aged man in silence. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just watched everything with calm eyes. Strangely, he was the one who made the whole room feel cautious. Later I learned he was the man behind a major investment fund that everyone wanted to meet, but he never introduced himself, never gave a speech, never sought attention. He simply observed quietly, and people slowly adjusted their behavior when they realized he was there. His silence carried more weight than any speech. Perhaps that is what the world today has lost, the power of stillness. When everyone speaks, the one who stays silent becomes different. When everyone rushes to show off, the one who hides what he has becomes intimidating. Display can bring light, but it also carries risk, because light not only illuminates, it exposes. And what is exposed can be hurt, dissected, and targeted. Niccolò Machiavelli, often misunderstood as cold and manipulative, was in truth the quietest observer of his time. He watched the rulers of Florence fall, not because they were weak, but because they were too loud. Those who boast about their strength are often the first to lose it. The truly powerful do not speak, they act. He once wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." That line was not advice, it was a warning. When others see too much, they begin to believe they understand you. And once they think they understand you, they start to plan how to move against you. The modern world may have changed its scenery, but the game remains the same. We no longer hide daggers under our cloaks like in Florence, but we hold something else in our hands, the smartphone, the double-edged blade of our time. We willingly share every detail of our lives, joy, sorrow, plans, failures, success. Every post is a small piece of a map for someone who wants to understand us, or worse, control us. Some say, "I just share to inspire." But where is the line between inspiration and self-satisfaction? Between openness and self-exposure? Between being seen and being seen through? One day, you announce your goal and receive hundreds of compliments. They call you brave and passionate. You feel recognized, motivated. But when the light fades, you realize you've placed an invisible burden on your shoulders. Now, every time you slow down, you fear being judged. Every time you fail, you feel ashamed for having declared too soon. Public exposure becomes a chain. And the silent one, he never talks about his plans. He just works. No one knows where he is, but when his results appear, everyone is stunned. He doesn't need a crowd to cheer because he was never performing. He doesn't need an audience because he is the one writing the script. There is one thing Machiavelli understood well. Real power does not lie in speech, but in knowing when to stay silent, because words are commitments, and early commitments are a loss of freedom. Think of moments in your own life. Have you ever said what you planned to do and then failed to do it? Have you ever shared too soon, only to feel trapped by your own words? Every declaration closes a door to change direction. Silence, on the other hand, is flexible space. It allows you to adjust, to move forward or backward without explanation. Yet today's society makes us believe that silence is weakness, that those who don't speak have nothing to say. We fear being seen as timid, fear being left behind in the dark. And in that fear, we begin to trade our control for visibility. We begin to perform ourselves. But performance is never power. It is only the illusion of power, a bright but fragile light, burning only through the gaze of others, and fading the moment no one is watching. Centuries ago in Florence, Powerful men stepped into the square declaring victory before the battle even began. They were praised, celebrated. They believed the cheers of the crowd were proof of their strength. But when the real fight came, they fell. Because true power never lives in what is heard, but in what is kept hidden. And just like today, among millions of voices on social media, there are those who seem to vanish. They do not post, do not tell, do not explain. But one day, when they appear, their results make the world take notice. People call them lucky or genius, but in truth, they simply knew when to stay silent. The difference between the showy and the truly powerful is not in talent, but in how well they control attention. The showy need attention to exist. The powerful choose when to use it, and only when the advantage is already theirs. In this world, the loud believe they are being heard, but in truth, they are exposing themselves to be understood. The silent seem to stand outside the game, but they are the only ones who still hold secrets. And in the game of power, secrets mean survival. Perhaps the real question is no longer how to be seen, but whether we have the courage not to be seen. To step off the stage, away from the spotlight, and quietly work in the dark, where real results are made, where real power gathers, where there are no applauses, but true strength. Because in the end, light only makes us visible for a moment, but darkness, if you learn to stand still within it, gives you a freedom that light never can. And in that freedom, you begin to understand, when others need to speak to be seen, your silence is already enough. Florence, the city of light, of art, and of blades, hidden beneath the music. There, golden walls covered in ornate patterns concealed schemes, and behind every smile was a crack. In those days, people learned that those who spoke too much never lived long. The most powerful were never seen on the front lines. They sent messages through glances, through intermediaries, or through silences long enough for others to guess their meaning. One evening in Palazzo Vecchio, during a banquet of nobles, a man raised his glass and declared his power, his armies, his alliances. Everyone laughed, applauded, celebrated. But only a few days later, he was arrested, his fortune seized, and his name vanished from the markets of Florence. No one heard his voice again. They said he failed because he spoke too soon. But Machiavelli, who observed it all, knew he failed because he spoke too much. In that Florence, silence was armor. People survived by hiding among the loud. Every word carried weight, but it could also be a sentence. In a city where power changed hands with every handshake, the silent ones were the last to survive. They were like shadows slipping through the night. No one knew what they thought, yet everyone felt their presence. It is strange to look at the present and realize we are repeating the same mistake as Florence. Only now we replace the banquets with social media, the applause with likes, the rumors with comments. We are still showing off. Only now we show off to the world, believing it makes us stronger. But Florence proved that the louder a man becomes, the closer he is to his fall. The truly powerful do not stand on stage to proclaim their strength. They sit in the dark and watch others reveal themselves. They are never in a hurry because they understand that real power is not a race of speed, but a game of patience. I once met such a man in Milan. He was the head of a large corporation, yet no one had ever heard him speak in public. No interviews, no displays of wealth. People only knew his name through the decisions that changed entire markets. In meetings, he spoke very little. While others were passionately presenting, he simply listened, sometimes closing his eyes as if uninterested. But then, when he opened them and said a single short sentence, the whole room fell silent. No one dared to add another word. I asked someone who had worked with him, "Why does he speak so little?" He replied, "Because he knows that words are bullets. Once fired, they cannot be taken back, and not every battle is worth shooting for." Perhaps that was what Machiavelli saw in his time, that true power never needs to be proven. When a man begins to boast, he loses his greatest advantage, the ability to make others guess. Because once others understand you, they begin to prepare against you. They predict where you will go, what you will do, what you will think. But when they do not know, they hesitate. They tread carefully, and that hesitation becomes your weapon. Today, we live in an age where people believe that transparency is power. They tell everything, reveal everything, thinking openness is a sign of confidence. But Machiavelli would smirk. for he knew that power lies not in what you say, but in what you choose to withhold. People call it the strategy of the shadow. A shadow never shines, but it makes every light cautious. The shadow is not weakness. It is the art of surviving among those who burn themselves in their own brightness. If you pay attention, you will notice that truly powerful people rarely appear. They do not talk about themselves. They do not promote. They do not prove with words, because they have learned one truth: words are a cost, and the wise do not spend what they do not need to. In the old courts, kings never spoke directly to the people. They let others speak for them, so that their words became rare, heavy like commands. When a king appeared and spoke, everyone fell silent, because they knew every word could change the fate of thousands. But if he spoke every day, repeating the same lines, his voice would lose its weight, like the ticking of a clock, noticeable at first, but soon fading into the background noise of life. Power works the same way. True strength lies in rarity. The more you speak, the less your words are worth. The more you appear, the less your presence matters. People stop being curious. They stop waiting. And when you become predictable, you are no longer feared. There is an old saying: the wise do not fear silence. They fear speaking wrong. Silence is the space to observe, to understand others before they understand you. In any negotiation, the first to speak is the one who loses power, because he has revealed what he wants, while the silent one still has time to calculate. In Machiavelli's time, those who announced their war plans before acting always lost. Today, that law still applies. Only now, the battlefield has moved from the ground to the internet. People boast about projects when they are still ideas, announce achievements before they are complete, and then they are overtaken, copied, even sabotaged, not because they are not capable, but because they spoke too soon. Meanwhile, those who truly succeed do everything quietly. They work in silence, prepare in silence, and appear only when it is done. When they speak, it is already over. They do not seek recognition. They seek results. Perhaps Machiavelli would call it the art of restraint, something the modern world has forgotten. We think speaking out is action, sharing is progress, and exposure is freedom. But no, sometimes holding back is the wisest move of all. The difference between the ruler and the ruled lies in who can stay silent longer. The ruler understands that patience and silence makes others lose balance. The one who cannot bear the pause and rushes to fill it with words will always reveal his weakness. If you have ever sat in a debate, you have seen this. The most confident person is the one who does not need to speak to prove himself. He lets others talk, lets them expose their insecurities. When his turn comes, a few words are enough to turn the entire room. That is the art Machiavelli spoke of. Not cruelty, but strategic calm. Because those who can control their words understand that every one of them has a price. In today's world, where everyone exposes themselves just to be seen, perhaps the boldest act is not to say more, but to say less. Because in silence, you can still hear your own voice the clearest. And sometimes, it is that very stillness that makes the whole world stop to listen. It is strange how people have grown afraid of silence. A quiet room makes us uneasy. A pause of only a few seconds in a conversation drives us to fill it with words. We cannot stand the stillness, because in that space, we are forced to face ourselves. So we talk, we share, we post, we broadcast, as if our existence depends on being seen. But have you ever wondered, are we trading depth for a temporary sense of presence? I once sat in a small cafe in Brooklyn, watching a young man live stream his startup journey. Every day, he shared each step, every plan, every raw emotion. Thousands followed him, praised him as honest, brave, inspiring. He smiled and kept talking, kept revealing. But only a few months later, when his project failed, the same people who had cheered for him disappeared. All that remained were the voices of criticism. I told you so. He talks more than he acts. No one remembered that they had once supported him. And in that moment, I understood something. The world does not reward exposure. It only punishes weakness revealed too soon. What this era calls authenticity is often just a new disguise for insecurity. We display our beliefs, our pain, even our fears, thinking it makes us brave. But bravery is not saying everything. It is knowing what to keep. Because truth loses its meaning when consumed as content. Someone once told me, silence is cowardice. I smiled. No, Silence is a form of discipline. A person who says everything they think is not free, but uncontrolled. True freedom comes from knowing when to keep something for yourself. We have forgotten that words shape reality. Once spoken, they bind us to the image others see. Then we must live according to that image. Even when we have changed inside, every declaration, every exposure, becomes an invisible chain that ties us to an older version of ourselves. That is not freedom, it is a gilded cage. An old friend of mine used to post all her plans online. She believed that making her goals public would motivate her to achieve them. But over time, she realized it was draining her. Every time she fell behind, she felt guilty, afraid of disappointing others. Whenever she wanted to change direction, she feared being called inconsistent. She no longer acted for herself, but for the eyes watching her. In a world that urges us to be constantly present, absence becomes an act of rebellion. Not silence from fear, but silence to preserve self-control. When you do not speak, others must guess. And in that space of uncertainty, they begin to respect you more, because they cannot define who you are or predict what you will do. Mystery gives weight. I once read a quote from a great entrepreneur. "I never talk about what I'm doing until it's done." When asked why, he said, "Because when I speak, I lose the right to make mistakes. When I stay silent, I remain free." That sentence stayed with me for years. Freedom, the thing we think we are chasing, does not come from the right to speak, but from the choice of when to speak. The hardest lesson in our time is not learning how to talk, but learning how to stay silent among those who cannot stop shouting. Every moment of silence goes against the current. Every minute we hold back feels like being left behind. Every thought we keep feels misunderstood. Yet within that distance, we begin to reclaim space for ourselves. Space to observe, to listen, to rebuild strength. If you are still listening now, you probably understand that feeling. The moment you hold back something you want to say, only to protect something deeper within you. Maybe you have been misunderstood for staying quiet. Maybe you have felt lonely because no one knew what you were thinking. But trust me, no one loses by keeping their dignity in silence. There are things that lose value when spoken, victories that lose power when shown off, feelings that stop being yours once they are shared. So, if you are listening, and you hear a small echo inside you that you have spoken too much, shared too early, and ended up feeling empty, pause for a moment. Breathe deeply. Keep that silent. Do not fear it, because within silence, clarity begins to form. Try just once to be silent in the crowd. Do not talk about your plans. Do not post your victories. Do not tell anyone what you are working on. Just act. Let the results speak for you. You will be surprised to realize that true power does not come from being seen, but from being impossible to predict. If you can feel that, if a part of you agrees, leave a small sign, not to prove anything, but to quietly acknowledge together that sometimes the greatest thing we can do for ourselves is to stop performing, to stop seeking validation, and to begin again in silence. Because sometimes, without a single word, the world will still hear you through the way you move, through the results you create, through the quiet space you leave behind. And in an age where everyone wants to be seen, those who know how to disappear are the ones truly worth noticing. There is a paradox that most modern people do not realize. The more we talk about the future, the smaller our future becomes. Every time we announce a plan, every time we share a dream, we unknowingly place it on the world scale. From that moment, it no longer belongs to us. It becomes something that can be judged, analyzed, compared, and doubted. And in that light, the fragile dream begins to wither. Machiavelli once wrote, "The promise given is a chain to the one who gives it." Because once words leave your mouth, they belong to the listener, no longer under your control. Perhaps that is why wise people often choose silence when they are building something, not because they fear being copied, but because they understand that true energy does not lie in declarations, but in unseen action. The one who speaks too soon is like a man showing his map to his enemy. The one who keeps quiet, who simply smiles and returns to work, holds a kind of power that others cannot measure. I once met an old designer in Paris who spent 20 years building a small yet exquisite brand. When I asked why he never promoted it loudly, he simply said, "I don't want to talk about what isn't complete. When something is still forming, it needs to be protected by silence." That answer stayed with me. Some ideas can only grow in the dark, just as seeds can only sprout beneath the soil. Expose them too soon, and they die under the light of attention. We still believe that declaring our goals gives us motivation. But the truth is, it also creates pressure. Once everyone knows, you no longer have the freedom to change direction. You must live up to the image they expect. Every delay, every mistake is seen. Slowly, you lose your ability to experiment, your joy of creation, simply because you fear being compared to your own words. You no longer act out of passion, but out of fear. The silent one, however, can fail without anyone knowing. He can try, err, and start again, without the burden of being watched. Silence gives him space to evolve. No one expects him to be yesterday's version, so he can change. No one knows what he is doing, so he can go further. Silence is freedom in its purest form. I once read about a writer who said he never spoke about the book he was writing because speaking of it is the fastest way to kill it. When we talk about something, the brain believes we have already achieved part of it. Excitement fades, creative energy disperses. But when we keep it inside, it continues to grow in the quiet, maturing, deepening, until it is strong enough to face the world without protection. In truth, most of the most successful people share one habit. They speak after the results appear, not before. They do not need applause or an audience, because they know the crowd can cheer today and turn away tomorrow. What they need is complete focus, something that can only exist when we stop explaining ourselves to others. The problem is that we have grown too used to hearing our own voice. We crave confirmation that we are on the right path, that others believe in us. But that validation is a double-edged sword. Once you need it, you depend on it. You begin to act for applause, not for your vision. And in that moment, you lose mastery over yourself. Machiavelli once said that the weak need to be loved, while the strong only need to be respected. But respect does not come from words. It comes from distance. When others do not know everything about you, they tread carefully. They hold back. They maintain that small distance where respect is born. But once you reveal all, they no longer fear you. You become an open book, easy to read, easy to understand, and easy to close. In the ancient courts, kings never revealed their thoughts. A glance, a nod, could inspire more fear than 1,000 threats. Because they understood that mystery is a tool of power. When people cannot predict you, they trap themselves in their own assumptions. And you, in silence, only need to stand still and watch. I once witnessed a meeting between two companies. On one side was a well-known director who spoke non-stop, explaining every detail, every number. Across from him sat a young woman, listening quietly, nodding occasionally, showing no reaction. When the meeting ended, she said only one short sentence, "We'll think it over." And a few days later, she was the one who controlled the entire deal. The man could not understand what happened. He did not realize he had revealed everything, while she had revealed nothing. That is the power of restraint. While others rush to be understood, to be seen, to be believed, those with true power simply wait. They do not need to win the conversation. They only need to win in time. Because in the end, all noise fades, and only those who can stand still long enough will see the full picture. And do you know what is most fascinating? That silence, over time, stops being a strategy. It becomes strength. When you stop explaining, when you stop proving, you begin to touch a deeper kind of confidence, the kind that needs no validation. You do not need anyone to know what you are doing because you know yourself. And perhaps that is the kind of power the modern world has forgotten. Not the right to speak, but the right to stay silent. Think about this. While everyone is chasing the light, perhaps it is the darkness where the truly great things are created. And while the world shouts for its heroes, maybe the real hero is out there somewhere, sitting quietly, making plans for something no one can see. People rarely realize the moment their lives turn into a performance. It starts so small, a compliment, a like, the feeling of being seen. Slowly, we get used to the light, addicted to it like air. And by the time we notice, we are no longer living. We are performing ourselves. Someone once told me he felt empty, even though everyone admired him. He had everything, fame, attention, endless praise. But when no one was watching, he didn't know what to do. Every action of his was directed outward, and nothing remained inside. He said, "I'm afraid that if I ever go silent, no one will remember me." I didn't answer, but I thought, that is the tragedy of being loved for what you display, not for who you truly are. Showing off may make us visible, but it also makes us vulnerable. When you flaunt a victory, people look for its flaws. When you announce a plan, they look for ways to get ahead of you. When you share your happiness, someone will envy it, even try to destroy it. That is why those who truly understand power never place themselves on the table of public attention. They know that whatever is seen too clearly will soon be targeted. Machiavelli did not glorify cruelty. He simply observed an eternal truth. The loud are predictable, the silent are feared. Like two warriors entering the arena, one raises his sword high, shouting victory and stirring the crowd. The other stands still, quiet, his gaze steady. Be honest, which one would you fear more? The shout may excite emotion, but silence plants unease deep in the heart. The modern world has it backwards. We are taught to express ourselves. But when everyone does, expression loses its value. Like a currency printed too often, its power fades. Every picture, every post, every declaration is a piece of our soul handed away. And we think we are being loved, but in truth, we are selling ourselves bit by bit. The danger is not that others know too much about us, but that we begin to need them to know. We crave recognition. We crave praise to feel worthy. That is the moment our inner strength begins to crack. Those who need to be loved are always easier to control than those who only need to be respected. When your worth depends on someone else's gaze, you have already given them the key to your own control. I once met a young woman working in the creative field. She was talented and hardworking, yet always felt she wasn't impressive enough. She said that if she didn't update herself every day, she feared she would disappear. She spent more time crafting memorable words than actually doing her work. One day, she confessed she no longer knew who she really was. Everything she said, wrote, and shared was for the audience's approval. I looked at her and thought she had become a product of the gaze, no longer the creator of it. Machiavelli once warned, "The need to be admired is the seed of self-destruction." When we crave praise too deeply, we will do anything to keep the spotlight on us. But the light never stays still. One day it will move to someone else, and we will realize we've forgotten how to walk in the dark. Showing off doesn't just weaken power, it distorts the soul. At first, we pretend to be seen. Over time, we become the very role we created. We no longer know who we are without applause. We fear losing the noise more than losing ourselves. And when that happens, true power has long left us. But the silent one is different. He doesn't need to prove. He doesn't need to explain. He works quietly, watching others speak, seeing them expose their greatest weakness, the need to be seen. He knows that the more someone craves attention, the easier they are to control. The more they need an audience, the less freedom they have. And while the crowd keeps performing, he waits. He waits for the world to tire of its own noise, so that his silence becomes the only thing worth noticing. In every system of power, what makes others fearful is not what they hear, but what they cannot predict. A true leader does not need to give orders every day. Others adjust themselves because no one knows what he's thinking. That uncertainty holds more influence than any speech. Think about it. If you are always reacting, always explaining, always telling people what you think and do, they will eventually learn your rhythm. They will know when you're weak, when you're angry, when you're ready to give in. And once they know, they can control you by that rhythm. But when you are silent, when you hold back, they can't read you. They must guess, tread carefully, and respect you. Within that guessing, power is born. People often think power means dominance, but it is really control. Control of emotion, control of words, control of timing. The one who knows when to stay silent not only keeps secrets, but also keeps control of every situation. A friend once asked me, "Don't you ever feel lonely for not sharing more?" I smiled. No, because I don't seek connection through speaking. I find it through understanding. When you understand yourself deeply enough, you no longer need others to confirm you. When you are quiet inside, you don't need the world to fill you with noise. Maybe, to many, silence looks like weakness. But remember, even a lion does not roar all day. It only roars when it must. The rest of the time it observes, it listens. And it is that patience that makes it the ruler. Because, in the end, True power is not about who gets heard, but about who can make others fall silent to listen. In a world where everyone rushes to speak, the one who knows how to stay silent becomes a rarity. That silence is not avoidance, it is strategy. It is like a man holding a blade who knows that power does not lie in the swing, but in the moment he chooses not to strike, because he understands that one precise blow, at the right time, is enough. I once attended a negotiation between two major companies. One side spoke for more than an hour, trying to prove their value, listing every detail, every number. The other man sat still, hands folded, his eyes calm, almost indifferent. Every time the other side paused, he simply smiled, nodded slightly, and said nothing. The air in the room began to tighten with that silence, a silence so heavy that everyone grew uneasy. In the end, it was the side that spoke too much that conceded. They feared what they didn't understand, feared what was left unsaid. He didn't argue, didn't explain. He controlled the entire room through stillness. Machiavelli understood this well. Silence is not the absence of reaction. It is the mastery of reaction. The one who can stay silent is not weak, but someone who has trained the strongest instinct of all, the ability to hold back when every part of them wants to respond. Today, we have forgotten that power. People rush to react to every opinion, every comment, every attack. Social media has turned us into predictable creatures, one provocation, and we respond instantly. But the moment you react, you lose control. You give someone else power over your mind. In the old courts, the truly powerful were the ones no one could read. They could listen to insults without flinching. They knew that even a frown could expose weakness. Their strength lay in consistency, like a mountain unmoved while storms raged around it. I once met such a man, a Greek consultant who had advised major corporations. During our conversation, I noticed he never answered immediately. When asked a question, he would pause for a few seconds, look down at the table, then speak slowly, deliberately. Every word carried weight because everyone had waited for it. He didn't seek attention. He made others give it to him. Silence has a strange kind of gravity. It forces others to fill the gaps with their own imagination, fear, admiration, uncertainty. When you speak little, people begin to imagine more, and what they imagine is often far greater than the truth. That is how power works. It doesn't need to prove itself. It only needs to be felt. Machiavelli once wrote, "Men fear what they do not understand." Indeed, silence creates a fog in the minds of others. That fog makes them cautious. The loud and predictable never inspire fear. But the quiet, composed observer, he makes the world slow down when his name is mentioned. Today's world confuses presence with noise. People believe that to be respected, they must always have an opinion, always speak up. Yet the paradox is, the less you speak, the more you are heard. The rarer your voice, the more valuable it becomes. People don't respect those who always talk. They respect those who only speak when it truly matters. A friend of mine, a leadership coach, once told me he never speaks during the first 10 minutes of a meeting. "I want them to say everything," he said, "so I can see who needs to be heard and who's trying to prove something. When they've talked enough, that's when I speak." He smiled. When you speak last, you don't have to speak loudly because everyone is already ready to listen. Perhaps that is the power Machiavelli called control of timing, knowing when to speak, and more importantly, when to stay silent. Silence is not absence. It is another form of presence, deeper, stronger, and more commanding. Because in silence, people begin to hear themselves. They reflect, they guess, they worry. You don't have to do anything. They expose their own weaknesses on their own. Someone once said, "In every battle, the first to make a sound reveals his position." That is true, not only in war, but in life. Every time we rush to explain, we hand someone a map of how to understand us. Every time we react, we reveal what hurts us. Every time we speak our emotions, we give others the tools to control them. True strength is not the absence of emotion, but the mastery of it. The strong man feels deeply, but does not let it show. He knows that every reaction is information, and in the game of power, information is the most dangerous thing to lose. Throughout history, the greatest leaders were not the ones who spoke the most, but the ones who made others speak for them. They knew that mystery sustains authority. A king can give orders, but a king who makes others guess his will, that king cannot be overthrown. Today we may no longer have thrones or palaces, but the principle remains the same. In meetings, in relationships, in every human game, the one who speaks less always holds the advantage. When you hold your words, you are not just keeping secrets. You are keeping your energy. Words consume energy. Every time you speak, a part of your power leaves you. The wise speak less, not because they have nothing to say, but because they choose to channel that energy into action. And perhaps, at the deepest level, silence is also the art of peace. When you no longer need to win every conversation, when you no longer need to answer every attack, that is when you are truly strong. Because real power never needs to be proven, it only needs to be maintained. There are victories without cheers, without witnesses. Only you, in silence, knowing you have stayed in control. And perhaps that is the highest form of power, the power of one who does not speak, yet everyone still hears. There is one truth most people never dare to admit. Real power does not come from being seen, but from being unreadable. When you are too easy to understand, you lose your mystery. When you are too visible, you become ordinary. Everything rare has value, even people. That is why the wise never allow themselves to become familiar. Imagine a room full of voices. Everyone is trying to speak louder, wittier, sharper to be noticed. But in the far corner sits a man, holding a glass of wine, calm and quiet. He says nothing, yet every now and then, someone glances at him just to make sure he is still there. Because his silence unsettles them. They don't know what he's thinking, who he's judging, or whether he finds them foolish. And because of that, he becomes the center of the room without moving an inch. That is the essence of power, when others revolve around you, while you remain still. Machiavelli once said, "A wise man should let others talk about him more than he talks about himself." Why? Because when others talk, they imagine. And human imagination always exaggerates. When you are silent, people paint you with their own fears, admiration, or envy. They will think you are deeper, stronger, smarter, only because you do not speak. And while they are busy creating an image of you in their minds, you have already won without lifting a finger. Silence does not make you invisible. It makes you untouchable. And that untouchability is the shield of power. People cannot destroy what they do not understand. They cannot attack what they cannot define. All they can do is watch and wonder. In this modern age, when everyone willingly turns themselves into an open book, the one who hides becomes rare, almost ancient. But for that very reason, they become powerful. They do not need to update themselves to exist. They do not need an audience to feel valuable. They choose to walk in the dark and let the light find them only when it is time. I once knew an old photographer who always refused interviews. When asked why, he smiled and said, "I let my photos speak for me. The less people know about me, the more they look at my work." He understood that once you let your image overshadow your craft, the power of your work fades. Because then people follow the person, not the vision. That is why the truly powerful often stay behind the curtain. The founder lets others stand before the camera. The leader operates in silence. They do not seek admiration. They seek influence. And influence does not come from being loved, but from being respected, even feared by those who cannot predict you. Have you noticed that people talk most about those who say the least? Their silence becomes the topic. Every gesture, every rare word is analyzed, interpreted, exaggerated. They do not need to create attention. Others create it for them. That is the art of power, when others build your legend for you. Meanwhile, those who flaunt themselves must keep performing to stay in the light. But the brighter the light, the deeper the shadow behind it. And soon they exhaust themselves, trying to perform for the world. The silent ones do not perform. They live, they act. And every quiet step they take carries real weight. When you choose silence, you begin to see what others miss. You hear the sigh in a crowded room. You notice who is afraid, who is pretending to be confident, who is speaking just to fill the emptiness inside. You become the observer, not the observed. And in every human game, the observer always has the advantage. Silence, if held long enough, becomes a language. It forces others to learn how to read you through your eyes, your pauses, your breath. Every gesture you make starts to matter because you do not waste it on words. A single nod from you can say more than a long speech. One sentence from you can echo louder than 100 explanations. Machiavelli once wrote, "A wise man never reveals all his thoughts, for even the most loyal ally may become an enemy when fortune changes. The world today may have no daggers or thrones, but that law still holds. The more you share, the less safe you become. The more others know, the easier you are to predict." Perhaps the secret to power, peace, and respect is found in something simple, knowing when to stay silent. Silence is not hiding. It is protecting. It is the space you keep for yourself. A private fortress no one can enter. A sanctuary in your mind where your plans, dreams, and wounds stay untouched by curious eyes. Let others boast. Let them rush to prove themselves. You only need to stand still, observe, and smile. Because in this game of the world, the loud think they are leading, when in truth, they are revealing their path. And you, the one who chooses silence, you do not run. You wait. You wait until the noise grows tired and fades. And in that quiet moment, when the world begins to crave something real, you appear. No need for show, no need for words. With your silent presence alone, you make the world stop. Because in the end, it is not the one who is heard who holds the power, but the one who can make others fall silent before he ever speaks. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If this message touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey we take together. Your support means the world to me.